Joe Parrish, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Serene?
Very well. I've known you for I think 3 years now on the
Yeah.
internet.
Getting close, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really knowing someone, but we Zoom every so often and we have great conversations.
Nowadays, that's knowing someone. I have more people in my social circle from that I've only met online than in person. Some of that's due to COVID, but some of that is just the nature of internet culture going back to like even 2007.
Yeah, it's true. I wonder, have you ever met any of those people in person?
Um, I guess let me think of internet people that I've met in person. See, I can think of maybe of at least two.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least two that I got to know decently and then met in person.
Was it significantly different when you met them in person?
Uh, I don't think that it was. No, I think in terms of what my relationship was with them online, it was the same as in person.
Because
Um,
I wonder if there's like a difference. I mean, there's something that in-person interactions give you that's something like chemistry or I mean, even like I can't when I'm paying attention to people in person, like I watch their feet, I watch their legs and where their legs are pointing because for instance, if you're having a conversation with someone and their legs are pointing towards the door, that usually means that they want to leave, or they probably
yeah, yeah,
like
I've heard that a lot too. If someone's legs are pointing at you, though, they're engaged with you. Um, and I've even heard like from like the people who think they're giving dating advice, if a woman's legs are pointing at you, but they're not close together, they're the other way, that suggests that she's attracted to you. I've heard things like that. No, I don't look for that. Usually people's legs are under the table, so I don't even see, but um, yeah, that's one thing I've heard.
there's this book, What Everybody Is Thinking. What Everybody Is Thinking, but Body is capitalized. It's by this, I think he worked for the CIA or one of those deep state type organizations. He was involved with aliens for sure. And he interviewed people and he was like this body language expert. It was a great book, actually. If nothing, it gave me a lot of information, but if nothing else, it was just reinforcing that you have to pay attention to people's body language. Because for instance, like, if if like somebody is tapping their foot a lot and then suddenly you say something and they stop tapping their foot, like it's an interruption of their flow of their state of mind. Like it doesn't tell you who's lying and who's not, but oftentimes bodily responses are like stress responses. So you can a lot of times see how stressed out someone is and you don't know what the cause is, but
Hmm,
like you can tell when their stress levels change, which is really important. Or yeah, so
interesting.
anything anti-gravity, anything like pumping the fists upwards or jumping up and down is like happiness, it's like expenditure of energy, stuff like that is pretty cool. Anyway, so you are I don't would you like to tell me a little bit about yourself?
I mean, yeah, you said you are, then I'm like thinking, now what am I?
Yeah.
Officially, I'm a legal assistant at a law firm. I guess that's one way of looking at it. But the way in which you know me is as kind of a community leader and moderator for the intellectual dark web, mainly on the subreddit and then the Discord server I made. Because our initial introduction was that like 10 episode podcast I did for the subreddit, and you were the first guest. And I remember we talked about um, the way feminism has changed and also about cults. And I see some of like the things you discussed informing a lot of the way you bring up things in your own video. I noticed like sleep deprivation is still like a concern for you about like sleep deprivation of the population at large. Anyway, that's how we met. Um, one thing I've also done is starting when I was 14. This was back in 2006. I had started getting involved in the Democratic Party. And I saw that documentary by Michael Moore, Fahrenheit 9/11, and got very upset about the Iraq War. And as a 14-year-old, I decided, well, because and really up to that point, I wanted to be basically an astrophysicist, but I thought, maybe politics is something that's actually very important. And so I started getting active there. And I joined the Teen Democrats in high school, starting my freshman year. I was involved in Young Democrats in college, had a major in political science. After I graduated from UNC in 2014, I was a candidate for a state House of Representatives here in North Carolina in my hometown. I didn't win. I moved back to Chapel Hill shortly after that. And I attempted to run for state house in the primary here in Chapel Hill in 2020. I didn't win. I did a lot of other things in the party from 2016 to 2020. Took on several different positions and roles. I worked on some other campaigns myself. And eventually I've just decided I don't want to help the Democratic Party anymore. I don't like or trust the Democratic Party really much anymore. And instead I'm focusing more on what I can do as an individual citizen, which kind of, as I was stepping out of what this was, this 14 to 15 year period of my life of being involved in the Democratic Party, as I became increasingly dissatisfied with it, with its dishonest partisan narrative, I stumbled into the IDW and was sort of there when it emerged. And then, I started posting on the subreddit. The creator of it offered me to become a moderator. And then from there, I'm just working on trying to keep the community thriving and alive and, keep it non-toxic like you would any kind of other internet forum, make sure people are following rules while also allowing there to be a space online, a large space where people can have like free dialogues about things and not be subject to, any form of censorship or something like that, which usually happens. Doesn't mean we never censor, because if you enforce forum rules, you're effectively censoring people by that way, but try not to censor people for having bad opinions or disagreeable ideologies. And that's a lot of what I do these days. And so when I'm not at work, I'm spending a lot of my time working on moderating those communities and trying to think of new ways to spice it up and make sure it's not just a gaggle of doomers as it seems to be lately.
Yeah, it's, to me, I see you as a person who is a gatherer of people. Like, you have this great civic duty. You seem to have this sense of like civic duty that kind of permeates from you. Like, you have this amazing knowledge of American history and how politics works that I don't really see in many people. And you also, you moderate something which doesn't sound very impressive on the surface, but like, you're so ingrained in culture and how, realistically, there are 70-something thousand people on the intellectual dark web. Like, essentially, you moderate the news feed of 75,000 people or whatever it is, and a good percentage of them might go on there every day. Like, there's actually a lot of responsibility in. And
then you got to figure there's probably several thousand who don't subscribe to the subreddit, but still pop in and lurk a lot. And because there are subreddits in which I participate where I don't necessarily subscribe to it. So yeah, it could easily be like 100,000 people or more who are influenced in that way.
I'm of the opinion that there's actually far fewer people influencing the cultural narrative than we think there are. Obviously everyone influences the cultural narrative in some way, but there's only really a handful of people influencing the widespread narrative. And I think a lot of them are Reddit moderators, actually. I don't know if you've read statistics about Reddit moderators, but.
Well, I've noticed that some subreddits, being moderators for those communities is a heavily coveted position, especially like when you're talking about a community that has like 10 million subscribers. You can have a tremendous impact on the social discourse then. Other like IDW related subreddits have larger subscribership. Like, I think the Jordan Peterson subreddit's in the 6 digits now. I think they have like maybe like 200,000 subscribers or something. And so I guess as online communities go that specifically identify themselves as IDW, whether it's literally our intellectual dark web or something else, ours is probably the largest concentration of that global online community, the one on Reddit. And so me and the other moderators, we've increasingly like realized that as it grows, the the significance of that grows, and the decisions we make as moderators, can magnify beyond what we might immediately be able to see and touch. And we've always been very nervous about of course overdoing it, but also like not setting the right standards to keep it from completely falling apart. Because to some extent you have to be heavy-handed if people are going to come in and brigade it or troll it and try to create drama in it so that it self-cannibalizes, or so that it can get flagged by Reddit administrators and then quarantined or completely shut down, as some Reddits have been before.
Yeah. What drew you to the IDW in the first place? I mean, I guess, yeah, what is this cultural phenomenon of the IDW and why is it so engaging?
I mean, I think the key link for me was Sam Harris. So I was familiar with him from the New Atheist movement, which I followed when I was in college, and I was more interested in folks like Hitchens and Dawkins, among the Four Horsemen, as they were called. So it was interesting because that was sort of like the intellectual celebrity club before the IDW. Was the Four Horsemen of the New Atheist movement: Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris. And New Atheism started, I guess, in the mid-aughts and petered out, I'd say, probably around 2013, 2014, toward the end of my time in college. And there was sort of a lull period. And Sam Harris at that point shifted from kind of just being a New Atheist figure to being a general kind of like public intellectual. His podcast started kicking up. He was releasing his meditation app. And he was, I guess you could say the takeaway is meditation sort of became his solution to the void that is created by giving up your religion, when scientific skepticism makes you realize your religion just doesn't make sense. And around this time, you start seeing a lot more of the kind of intense cultural war issues emerge. They started 2013, 2014, the rise of wokeness and stuff, and then anti-wokeness in turn. Trump announces his presidential candidacy in 2015. And so Sam starts, making commentaries on things like this. And I noticed that he is consistently making extremely patient and nuanced observations of things. And one of the few people who was able to sort of tell it like it is for the left and right without being an edgelord or a miser about it. And eventually it's just, as I'm, watching Sam, he sort of, I feel like he was the first person to really start threading a lot of things together. So he had appearances on Joe Rogan. He was Dave Rubin's first guest on the revamped version of the Rubin Report, where he got his own studio, the one you see now. Right after he left the Young Turks, he was kind of just doing it in his room or something. I don't remember exactly. But when he built up that new studio and launched it there, Sam was his first guest for that. And
what happened to Dave Rubin?
We'll get into that. So
Sam.
And then from there, Sam kind of, I think his credibility came to Dave Rubin a bit. And then you had a lot of other kind of heterodox people find their way onto Dave Rubin. So Eric Weinstein was a guest on Dave Rubin in 2017. And this was before the Evergreen College thing happened with Brett, for example. And before that, it would be about a year before the term intellectual dark web was coined. But then, the Evergreen College thing happened. So Brett Weinstein ends up being a guest on Joe Rogan from that. Similarly, around 2016, I think it was, Jordan Peterson's talking about the Bill C-16. And it took a couple years for that really to gain momentum. But one of the first things that really increased his celebrity a significant degree was appearing on the Sam Harris podcast, which I listened to those episodes. The first one that didn't go well, and then the second one that went better, which I think really sort of set the tone for the IDW as a concept, where they would have a very polite disagreement on things like that. Then shortly after that, Jordan Peterson appeared on Kathy Newman. And Ben Shapiro is popping up here and there too in places. So we'll just say that Ben Shapiro was in the air. And then basically, you know, by the spring of 2018, the IDW as a concept is introduced, and Dave and Friends, the creator of the subreddit, created it. And then in the summer, I ended up joining the subreddit and getting active there. And then in a few months, I got offered a moderator position. I was in the middle of working on a congressional campaign when that happened, I remember.
Well, okay, that's like a good historical overview, but like what spoke to you so much about the IDW?
So what bugged me is in the Democratic Party, it became very difficult to have an honest conversation about the shortcomings of the party. And often there was a lot of smoke and mirrors done with identity politics. And so let's just look at the Bernie-Hillary primary contest in 2016. Like, remember how like it was very different than the primary in 2020, where there were a lot of players. In 2016, it was a very much like it was a war for the soul of the Democratic Party between the Clintonite elites and the populist Bernie bros, basically. And the Clintonite elites won, unfortunately. And part of what enabled them to win was just sort of like accusations in which they would play on liberal fears like, oh, if you don't support Hillary because you don't like female leaders, things like that.
Nothing about Hillary stealing money from the country of Haiti in disguise of charity.
Yeah, the fact that she had like a lot of really questionable relationships, even in the best light, and then the fact that she was just a blatant corporatist. She and her husband can't say no to a check, and then you had a guy like Bernie who can't be bought, who won't be bought, and he's going to make the American economy work for the people, and pass regulations against corruption and big donors.
So
all of this in the wake of this is up to 2016. This is all the wake of the 2008 Great Recession, and how that really just reversed a lot of fortunes for Americans. And now an opportunity to redefine the party to address those real bread and butter needs that Americans were having. The 2016 primary was a contest in which that could have been achieved, and it failed. And so I got involved in the Progressive Caucus of the North Carolina Democratic Party immediately after in 2016. So to kind of go at your my ability to bring people together, it was the Progressive Caucus was basically like the Bernie campaign people sort of having an officially recognized affiliated organization within the state Democratic Party here in North Carolina.
What is a caucus? It has the word "cock" in it, which is pretty funny, but I don't know.
A caucus it can be a lot of things. So don't think of it as like a caucus, like when you have like a caucus in Congress. That's a different thing. A caucus here in the North Carolina Democratic Party is basically like an affiliated organization that is considered part of the Democratic Party, but it's not like the main party, and it usually serves some sort of narrower purpose. And I think other states have similar versions of this. An affiliated organization can basically spawn county chapters across the many counties in North Carolina, and the state level of a caucus and the county level of a caucus are entitled to certain privileges in the state and county levels of the main party as well. So what I did is I was the first person to organize and found a county chapter of the Progressive Caucus here in Orange County, where Chapel Hill is. After applying to become an organizer with the state caucus, I had a chapter formed and officially organized within about 6 weeks, which I didn't think was that hard. But we later found that other people were just terrible at organizing county chapters, even in places. Even in places where there was no shortage of willing people, people who were feeling to burn. And so
I have heard a lot of people criticizing politicians, for instance, during the pandemic and stuff. Oh, you didn't prepare us enough. And I'll tell you what, I would be fucking terrible. I can't criticize them at all because I would have done it way worse than them. And I think most people would have. And We like to criticize politicians, but most of us can't organize.
For me, it's just, I'm a very unusual person. So when I, put in my name for it, I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to see it through to completion. And anything else for fun that I was going to do, I didn't even think about. I just made sure it happened. I planned everything I was doing around that at that point. And so a lot of people just aren't willing to do that for free. I'm doing this as a volunteer member of the Democratic Party. And but one thing I encountered in the Progressive Caucus that really was just for me, it's like the straw breaking the camel's back, is because obviously with the general party, I'm upset enough with how the bootlickers of the Clintons are getting their way, is how many of my fellow progressives are just completely just thrown off whack by things related to identity politics. And in general, and I think Brett Weinstein made a good observation of this one time when he talked about the Occupy movement, how like the Occupy movement started as like this very genuine and like forceful critique of the excesses of American capitalism in the wake of the Great Recession.
Yeah.
But what happened to Occupy and what happened to the Bernie following, which I observed in the Progressive Caucus, is this anti-authority anarchist element gets in. And wokeness is a version of that for sure. And it's a problem where, I mean, people trend toward this anyway in volunteer organizations, because people don't like to join a volunteer organization and then be told what to do. They think that the leaders of the organization should be grateful you even showed up to work inefficiently for free. But like, if you're going to like plan and organize any kind of operation, you kind of just need to make peace with the fact that some people are going to set the plans and the strategy and call the shots, and other people just need to fall in line. But a lot of folks wanted to be basically backseat leaders. So as the founding president of this chapter, even though I officially, like on paper, had a lot of authority to direct the organization, it didn't last very long because people just didn't want to be told what to do. So I ended up just resigning and saying, okay, well, you do it. And the chapter never really went on to do much of anything after that. And they realized that like I was the only one who had a lot of knowledge about how the North Carolina Democratic Party operated, and how to navigate those things and set a plan accordingly. And they alienated the one guy who was bringing all that to the table, just because people want to feel like they're the ones in control, but then they don't want to be like they don't have their name at the head of the organization. Because if you're basically the lesson I learned is you've heard that line from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, which is, with great power comes great responsibility. What I learned is most people don't understand that the inverse of that is true. With great responsibility comes great power. So if you're going to give somebody a responsibility, right? If you're going to make their name accountable for things, you then have to give them power in exchange to make things happen. And most people do not have the stomach to agree to that. Most people want to outsource all the responsibility to somebody else while keep all the power for themselves. They want to be backseat drivers. And as soon as I realized that that's how things were going to operate, even with the progressives, even with our unified vision about what needed to be fixed in the party, I said, I'm out. I'm not wasting my life on this anymore. And then I started focusing more on these kinds of things, because another thing I learned is just like that you kind of have to like let people think that you being in charge is their idea. You can't come in and like start a chapter and say, I'm going to run this thing, and necessarily hope that people are going to do it, which is also why I no longer plan to run for office. It's and we talked about this before, where people misunderstand about what is interesting about the Roman general and statesman Cincinnatus. And he's one of the more well-known Roman figures, at least in America, because comparisons have been made between him and George Washington. Because George Washington basically was the head of the army and had plenty of opportunities to become the dictator of the United States after winning the revolution, but he gave up his command, and even when he was elected president, he voluntarily did not run a third term, and just he was even offered a monarchy at some points and turned that down. And so, Cincinnatus was made Roman dictator without him even knowing. He was at home on his farm.
Right? Yeah, he was a general first, and then he was a great general, and then he went to his farm.
Yeah, he was in retirement on his farm, and then they came to him when there was a crisis, and they said, "Hey, Cincinnatus, did you know that you're a dictator? Like, we like you so much that we trust you so much that we made you dictator and gave you absolute control of the entire state without even asking you. So, here's your command, and please go solve the crisis." And that's a very big thing to give to somebody. Now, all the Roman dictators up until like the later days of the Republic returned their power, but Cincinnatus is interesting not because he gave it back, but because I think he was completely removed and away from the decision. The Roman people thought it was their idea to make him dictator, and he did not go around and ask for it. There are other dictators who were in Rome, who were in the Senate, who, when there was a crisis, they said, "Hey, why don't you guys make me dictator?" Right? But the way Cincinnatus did it is differently. People came to him. And that is actually what I think is interesting.
Is that what we should do with our current politicians? Should we just elect whoever we want in the country, and then they have to become the president? Like,
well,
that
would be an interesting approach. That would be an interesting approach. That would be difficult, I think, to formalize. But I think there's a spectrum where we can really egg people on who haven't had much of an interest in seeking office.
So expensive to seek office.
Yeah, and because the thing is, people who, you have to always wonder, what are the motives of somebody who's actively seeking it out? And like, the way you hear about this person is not because of their accomplishments and their character, but they're on the campaign trail and you ran into them. Like, they could
is going to be.
They could have some like important goals, but they could be, I think, as you were just saying, narcissistic and selfish.
Look, I just don't understand. Like, it seems like the way we run politics right now is it's self-selecting for liars and for narcissists. I mean, you know a lot more about Congress and Senate and stuff like that than I do, but apparently, from what I've heard, it's something like you become a congressperson and then you have this one thing, you want to clean a river or whatever it is. You have this one thing that you want to do. And in order to get your river clean, you have to shake hands with the other guy who wants to, build new structures in the park and whatever it is. And actually, the guy building new structures in the park is trying to pass a bill that is highly sponsored by a coal magnate that is trying to dig right in the middle of forest land that's supposed to be protected or whatever it is, And so you have to like do all these deals with other people that are not necessarily for the good of your country to get your one thing done. And I mean, at that point, you're kind of, you have to lose your integrity. I mean, the position, I think, is selecting for people who are able to give up their honesty and integrity in certain ways and deal with the intense hatred from the public. I mean, politicians never do anything right.
That could be a way to compromise integrity. But sometimes going into office with very few wants can be useful, because if you have few things that you really need, there's not a lot that can be used against you. You don't have very many vulnerabilities. So like, if cleaning the river is just one of 100 other things that congressmen wanted, they can say, "Oh, well, you're going to have to keep a dirty river, or you're going to have to let us pass this bill to make your river even worse, or we'll take away this labor reform law, and we'll take away this healthcare law, and you'll lose that too." So sometimes you can do that. And I've often found that increasingly, as the party tries to get people to toe the line more, they're seeking to make members come in to support this whole bundle of things from top down. And if you just get the few things you need, you're in a position to sort of like, as long as your voters are like, don't really care a whole lot besides you doing those few things, you could then basically have the freedom and integrity to vote intelligently yes or no on certain things. I think like the movie Charlie Wilson's War kind of gives an example of that. Now, of course, this is a film, and we see a version of Charlie Wilson played by Tom Hanks, And so that might give him too much credibility than he normally would have. But there's a line where he says, I'm really lucky. I live in the one district in the entire country that doesn't want anything. So I get to vote yes a lot. And so, what he was trying to do then is like, he just saw an opportunity to help chase the Soviets out of Afghanistan and help the Afghanistan, the Afghan people, and went through with it. Of course, we know it all didn't pan out well, but that was his objective. And like a similar thing I did is in college, we had a model Congress course, and we were assigned to role play certain members of Congress. And I got assigned to be Fred Upton from Michigan, who at the time, I don't know if he still is, was the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And then the party leadership fired me from my chairmanship for just kind of a silly reason. And so my decision then is like, if I'm thinking like, well, if I'm Fred Upton, what am I going to do? I'm going to get my chairmanship back because that's my best ability to leverage good things for my district. So we were going to we had to write bills as like an essay assignment, but then after the essays were read and graded, we would go through with trying to get them passed on the floor. So what I did is after they were graded is I pulled my bill out of consideration so that I could just focus exclusively on getting my chairmanship back. So that wouldn't be just a thing I had to worry about defending on top of doing that. And I successfully got my chairmanship back. I hatched a whole scheme. I recruited Republican defectors who also had issues with the party leadership, and then formed a secret coalition with the Democrats that gave us a majority of votes on the floor. And then I sprang it on the majority leader of the Republicans at the last minute saying, hey, I'm unhappy about this, and these other Republicans are unhappy about this, and we're in league with the Democrats, and we have a majority today, and class starts in 5 minutes, so give us what we want. So then he had no choice but to cave. And so, but if I had to worry about defending my bill too, I would have been in a much worse position to negotiate. So I just took it off the table. And I don't imagine that, even though that was a fictitious scenario for the purposes of the classroom, that it's the only circumstance in which that would emerge. And much of how I live my own life is I'm able to avoid certain, I guess, challenges to my integrity or temptations to stray from it, because I keep things simple. I only focus on what I truly need and want, and I can just focus on what really matters. I don't think we have congressmen who do that, and I think that's one of the problems there is that when they don't do that, the incentives around them can corrupt them.
How do we make sure we get congressmen who do that?
Fundamentally, the people in Congress are a reflection of what their voters want and are. So, I can't read someone's mind when I vote for them. No, but if you just aggregate,
I can't read very well.
So it's let's just put it in very simple terms. So if you have a Democrat in the Senate, you have to assume Democrats put him there. Republicans didn't put him there. Democrats put him there. If you have a senator from North Carolina, people from North Carolina put him there, not people from Virginia, not people from New York or California, people from North Carolina put him there. And then you have to assume, well, if you have a senator or a member of the House who's a crook or lazy or something, there's probably something that are crooked or lazy about the voters, and they just don't realize it about themselves.
You think so? You think that's quite it's almost like a Jungian idea, that we're unconsciously putting people who are like us in the power.
Well, here's the paradox, right? Everyone complains about dishonest and crooked politicians, and yet politicians have a very successful reelection rate. People always want to outsource the responsibility to someone else, like I said. So they blame everyone else's member of the House. They blame everybody else's senator, but they alone, I'm electing the right congressman. I'm electing the right senator. Everyone else needs to pick a better one, and that's why Congress sucks. And people believe this to varying degrees of explicitness or implicitness, but that is basically the psyche of the American electorate, and it's why Congress never gets better, because it basically requires people, if there's going to be conscious voting to reflect the kind of principles we would want members of Congress to have, it requires a self-realization within the voter that they've just been doing it wrong for 20 or 30 years. And if you know, it's a very difficult thing for people to do, because you kind of have to realize, oh, wait, I have actively been voting for people and empowering them to make society worse for, my entire adult life, basically. And, I mean, that's embarrassing to admit, even just to yourself. This is why I couldn't get like people who supported Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party to just see the error for ways, because they've been sort of supporting the Clinton since the 90s.
Yeah,
and
like a lot of people don't have the power of introspection quite as much.
Right. And so then the question is, are the voters going to do that? That's what would have to happen. They would have to actively vote for members of Congress with just a different way of operating. Our voters are actually going to have the self-awareness to do this. I'm not confident that they are. That's a big reason why I'm not particularly active in
You can think
politics.
about how many people that for instance, in real life, have something bad happen to them that is absolutely their fault. Like, I mean, let's say, how many people do you know that like get with a person and they just get with a string of bad relationships that all have like the similar qualities, and then they keep saying, oh, my luck, I have terrible luck, where it's like, well, no, if you introspect a little bit, you'll realize that you haven't just magically stumbled upon these 5 abusive boyfriends. Like you are choosing them in some way.
Right. See, what people really have a hard time understanding is there's this fallacy that nearly the entire human population has whenever something bad happens, which is the fallacy is that people think that blame is basically a monopoly, that people can't have different shares of the whole pie of blame. Some individual or maybe a defined entity composed of specific individuals has all the blame. So Democrats will put all the blame on the Republicans, and there's no blame for the Democrats in their heads. And Republicans will put all blame on the Democrats, and there's no blame for the Republicans in their head. But realistically, blame is on both sides. And even if folks can momentarily realize that, like, oh yeah, ours is worse, it's like, well, you guys have a controlling interest in the blame. Okay, so yeah, Hillary might have done that, but the Republicans did these 10 other things. And the takeaway should be, if you can even find a little bit about the problem, the 1% that was your fault, even if it was just 1%, your reaction should be, how do I not be responsible for that 1% again?
Yeah.
And so I started to have that realization in my own life on things. And then I began to realize, okay, I need to change things. Then I realized from there, okay, I've changed these things about me. I have gotten rid of these bad habits. Does the Democratic Party get better for it? And I said, no, because I know nobody else is going to do that.
I wonder if have you ever read Jocko Willink's books on leadership?
I haven't read them, but I have heard him discuss a lot of his ideas on leadership.
Yeah.
And some of like what I'm saying is borrowing from him, where people need to realize that, if you're a leader, what your commands are, people need to feel like your commands are actually their idea, like that they can do with it. And, that's one thing I certainly could have done better, organizing the Orange County chapter of the Progressive Caucus.
Well, I wonder too, like other people have caucuses that work, right? So yours didn't work, and I wonder, like, I mean, I think you're probably a much better leader now than you were before as well. I mean,
I've certainly improved since then. I don't mean to give too one-sided of an account of things, because I definitely had worse character traits at the time I was doing these things. What got me though is I sort of went back in my head and say, okay, go back, Joe. Don't make these mistakes that you made. What changes? And I'm like, I don't think fundamentally anything changes. In fact, I think all I would have done was increase the period of time that it reached, or like increase the amount of time it would have taken to reach a critical failure and learn that it was a waste.
Yeah.
So, and I just sort of thought, because like, I kept thinking like, I shouldn't have done these things. I should not continue to do these things. Let's just purge it from my behavior. And but does that actually like help me meet my goals? I'm like, no, because I know I need these other folks to change in a different manner too. And I just know they're not going to do that. are under no obligation to do that for me.
So you mentioned before that you had some issues with the Democratic Party. What were they specifically?
So like an example, so one thing I talked about was just kind of the tendency of people to want to have someone who's going to be the leader of the organization, but then they will mutiny on them whenever it actually requires them to do work and just sort of stick with the plan. So there's that.
Is this a Democratic Party characteristic? Like, do you think the Republicans would do that as well?
I think they could, because I think imagine like there are several intersecting variables that contribute to this behavior. So I think in some ways liberals don't like to do that. I think if we focus specifically on progressives among the Democrats, they're more kind of, with being more populist and anti-elite, they have a tendency to resist authority. And then just think if people who are volunteers, and so members of the Republican Party who are active in the Republican organizations are also volunteers, they feel no sense of obligation to do as they're told. Now, when you're at work and you get a paycheck, and if you don't do as you're told, you lose your paycheck, you can't pay your bills, you go homeless, you starve. Child services takes your kids away because you're not fit to raise them. Bad things happen.
You have a mountain of fear motivating you to work for.
Yeah. So no, the thing is like the boss has like your boss, even though most people have, at least I hope, decent relationships with their bosses, or like among those who do, they understand there's this existential danger posed to them if they cross their boss.
Yeah.
Right? Even the ones who get along with their bosses. But there's not that in the Democratic Party. I actually, toward the end, began advocating like, why don't we pay our officers? And then they'll feel more motivated to like earn that check and like, and then if they don't do it, then it makes more like, the thing is, if we had bad officers, so officers who just didn't do anything or come to meetings, it's really hard to motivate people to essentially impeach them and remove them from office, which we need, because just like, oh, why you got to be so mean, basically.
I want to ask you, do you think you inspired them? Because we have two motivation sources. We have the fear, which they didn't have, and then we have the carrot. We have the motivation to do something and to make change. And do you think you like lit that flame inside of them?
For some folks, yeah, because some folks told me that. But then there are some folks like that who were independents that I convinced them to register as Democrats so that they could participate in the party and stuff. Which that was my influence for sure. But I think part of the problem is that can only get you so far. At the end of the day, people have to have some sort of intrinsic motivation that lines up with you, which is why Cincinnatus didn't have to go around asking to become dictator. The Roman people were intrinsically motivated to make him dictator without even asking him, right? And you have to put yourself in that position. And the way Cincinnatus did that is he had lived such a successful and honest life up to that point, or so history tells us, that he was an obvious candidate to make dictator, even though he was miles away and not in the city. And so, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you need to be able to do for yourself. And we don't have a lot of folks like that who are among the names on our ballots. They're people who self-promote, and in order to win the promotion game, they need money. In order to get money, they have to make deals with donors and be under their thumbs. I think it's crazy actually that people think we need an Epstein Island to control politicians. Like, I mean, campaign contributions do a sufficient job of that for nearly all of them.
Why are we allowed to contribute money why are politicians allowed to get money from us?
But that is the crazy thing. It's now there are things where you can't like directly bribe them, but like
but they do.
The victory is contingent on having your campaign coffers.
People are giving $1 million speeches or $50,000 speeches. It's a bribe. It's.
Oh yeah, so like Hillary's Wall Street talks were a bribe, and then it became even more suspicious when she wouldn't release the transcripts of them.
Yeah. And
then when they did come out, then it comes up. She says to this talk to Goldman Sachs, I believe you should have a public and a private position on an issue, which basically said, oh, Hillary thinks she should officially have a strategy of lying to the public, and then her real position, we'll see it when it happens. And that's why she didn't release the transcripts. And she got paid in that same speech too. It's crazy. Yeah, that's the issue. It's You know, like George Washington, he was independently wealthy. He didn't need anybody, and he was apparently satisfied with what he had. And that's why they asked him to become the first president, and he won in a landslide. And you know, he initially was like not inclined to do it.
Do we arrest any politicians who start taking bribe money? Is that what we do? If you're taking contributions from oil companies, not that I'm terribly against oil companies, but like if you're taking contributions from oil companies, from Goldman Sachs, you are not an unbiased person anymore.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that campaign contributions are seen as a form of speech in this country, when it's clear that it's not intended to function anything like speech. It's intended to
the campaign contributions contributed to the politicians who made it, so it was a form of speech.
If I'm just giving my opinion, like that speech, but if I am trying to create like a financial relationship where I have someone under my thumb, I don't see how you can realistically, in a court of law, just looking at all the facts, conclude that that's speech. But that's what the Supreme Court did in 2009 or 2010 with the
paper, I'm sure. But like, isn't this a Republican and a Democratic view? Don't both parties want, like, real people? Don't we want Goldman Sachs not to be able to pay off our politicians?
I mean, I think most people want that. I think in terms of like what the formal positions of parties are, they might have different answers to that question. But I think that the general people can sort of see the problem with a big bank like Goldman Sachs or any other big company. Nowadays, the robber barons aren't necessarily the banks, although they are to some extent, but it's a lot of big tech companies. I think a lot of people realize, like, if we are a democracy, decisions should be made on, you know, what is the consent of the people. And that kind of goes down the drain when the people who have the money keep politicians under their thumb.
This is my problem with politics right now. This is one of the major issues, because I think the people literally could, I think we could change things. But the issue is that we go to a protest and we have these signs that say, stop global warming. And
protests don't do anything. Protests
protests do things. I think protests do things. Like, I know someone who has a farm, and during the bushfires a few years ago, some politicians came by and they went to all the farms and they were like, hey, how can we help? We'd love to help if we could. And then, you know, one of the owners of this farm says, hey, I'd love it if you could change my postcode so I could get some volunteers. Like, there's some issues with, like, if you get workers on your farm in certain areas, they can get a visa. And they're like, oh, I would love it if you could allow it so workers could work on our farm and get a visa. And so the politician, there was this very simple thing that they could do. It was a binary switch, and that's what they did. They changed the postcode. So now this person on their farm could get workers and get a visa. And it's like, I actually think if you give politicians a very simple, a very clear suggestion, they want to help their constituents because they want to get reelected. And so, but the issue, I think, is that we're coming over here, we're saying, reduce CO2. Like, how does that's not a plan. That you're just giving me this giant overview that doesn't really make a lot of sense. There's no like clear plan of action here. If you gave politicians a clear plan of action, let's say, like, here's another one. I'm those giant Congress bills. There are these bills that are being passed in Congress that are like 1,000 pages long, and politicians have 4 hours to read them. And AOC talked about this, and I'm not a huge fan of AOC, but like, I was pretty pissed off that the Republicans didn't mention this at all, because AOC said, like, we only had 4 hours to pass this bill. We couldn't possibly read 1,000 pages in these 4 hours. And like, no Republicans were on her side, because it's so tribal that just because she's from the other team, we don't support her. Like, that's fucked.
And here in my state of North Carolina, our General Assembly, which is the North Carolina version of Congress that sets North Carolina law, on 9/11 in, I think it was 2018. The Democrats were at, no, it wasn't 2018. It was 2019. Now, I'll give you some backstory. So the Republicans in the Senate and House had a supermajority here in North Carolina, such that they could override a veto by the governor. So even though they had a supermajority in the legislature, a Democrat won the governorship in 2016. And so But he had no ability to veto because they had a supermajority. In the midterms, there was a blue wave, and the supermajority was broken. So the Republicans still had the majority. They were not immune to a gubernatorial veto. And so then the budget was coming up for 2019. And there was a 9/11 commemoration event going on 9/11. All the Democratic legislators in the Senate and House went to attend that. The Republicans called a secret session and ran a vote to override Governor Cooper's veto. And since they technically accounted for at least 2/3 of those present, which is what you need to override the veto, they actually managed to override the veto by secretly doing it behind the Democrats'
How do you
back.
draw a secret session that the Democrats don't know about?
Well, basically, one of the Democrats left. They said, okay, we're calling a session. And they just didn't tell the Democrats. The Democrats are at a 9/11 commemoration event somewhere else in town. And then they find out the
arrested
budget for the entire year.
People like I don't care what the law is. You need to arrest these people. You need to at least find them.
Here's the thing.
These are
so the people who voted for those Republican legislators, they will never vote against them for that. They will never do that. And those are the same people who are going to ask, why are politicians so crooked and corrupt? If you knowingly reelect someone who did that, you're a crook.
Yeah.
You are your own blood and bones a crook.
Yeah.
And there are moments where Democrats will do something like that, and Democratic voters will still reward them for that. So we actively reward people for god-awful toxic behavior when they have power. And yet we are also surprised that we have god-awful toxic leadership. It's really amazing.
It's yeah, I wonder, the thing is, like, most voters don't do this research. And I actually am not sure if they should be. I don't know how involved you should be in politics, because honestly, it's probably not that useful for the day-to-day person. Like, you could be doing something.
Oh, I mean, it wasn't a quiet event here in North Carolina. It was well known that it happened.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
I don't know of a single Republican who lost their seat specifically because of that.
Yeah, that's the thing. We have this issue where I think I posted this Yeonmi Park the video the other day, and somebody said, why are you posting this video? We all know that North Korea is bad. I mean, it was slightly longer than this and probably a slightly better argument, but it was essentially like, she's on our side. Why are you against her? And it's like, I still think she's lying.
That's the problem I ran into in the Democratic Party. Why are you attacking Hillary? She's on our side.
Yeah.
Well, she's a crook. How can I complain about crooks in the Republican Party as a Democrat and then see a big crook next to me in my party and just tolerate it? I look like a liar.
Blue team. We're part of the blue team. She can do anything she wants. Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. It's like, maybe we shouldn't allow crooks on it. Maybe we shouldn't allow liars on our team, and then we have the best team. I don't know. Crazy idea.
And in fact, like when I met people who were in their hearts Bernie supporters in 2016, but bubbled in Hillary Clinton in the primaries, the reasons they told me is they got scared and nervous at the last minute. Oh, Bernie can't win. I got to stick with Hillary. I got to stick with the experienced Democrat. And like, people just, they don't have the stomach to stand by their principles. And even though they didn't like Hillary, even though they thought she was a crook, they just did it because they thought they had to. Yeah. It's like there's a mind virus in people.
Yeah, it's tough. There's another thing that the IDW kind of mentions that I actually I just put together then, just when you were talking, and it's there seems to be this kind of issue with modern day politics, and this is like more of a modern day social thing. It's less about the political issues. But have you ever heard of the victim triangle?
Victim triangle,
or the drama triangle, it's called, or I don't know, people call it triangling or whatever. It's like,
I imagine it's some kind of concept.
Yeah, it's a so in like theater, I think this originally involved in theater, and there's this, when you're writing a good play will always have a victim, a perpetrator, and a savior. And that's yeah. And
that's kind of like Team America World Police, where he's like, some people are dicks and some people are pussy and some people are assholes.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're a pussy, you get fucked by a dick sometimes, but you need him to fuck the asshole or else there'd be shit all over everybody.
Yeah.
But that sounds like what Matt Stone and Trey Parker's version of it is.
That was a beautiful movie. It was an excellent movie. Yeah. One of my favorites still to this day. World Police. What a good name. So yeah, so it seems like, so in the, yeah, so essentially in the, but these ideas, like the drama triangle will play out in day-to-day life as well. And actually, if you think about it enough, and it's such a simple concept, but this actually really changed a lot of my perspectives. The victim actually has the power, because somehow, oftentimes I mean, it depends. If you're chained up in somebody's basement, no, you don't. But oftentimes the victim actually has the power to bring in the savior and the power to choose not to be a victim anymore. And like anyone in the situation can step out of the triangle. And so like, if you're a savior and you're constantly going in and swooping and helping this person who's always a victim, who always happens to be in these terrible situations, you can like decide to step out of it and be like, hey, I'm not part of this, you know, and a perpetrator too. And I noticed that I'm noticing in my media, and this is kind of like the IDW stuff, like there's in the IDW type circles, there's good media, there's useful media, and then there's like stuff that sucks you in and makes you angry a lot of times for whatever reason, right? So there's, you know, there's media that is probably helping you. Good media would be like, I don't know, sometimes inspirational stuff, or like meditation advice from Sam Harris, or whatever, you know, just like useful stuff that helps you in your day-to-day life, maybe some inspiration. And then the bad stuff is like trans people are fucking whatever they're doing. They're taking over. They're using our bathrooms. They're swimming in the.
They're corrupting our children. Yeah.
Just... yeah. They're reading stories to our children. All that. And then on the trend, on the liberal side, it's like, it's always, we're a victim. I watched this video by Matt Walsh, and he's really, I don't think he's a great thinker, to be honest with you. I don't know if you know who Matt Walsh is, but he's this Republican type of guy, and his role is essentially to be the perpetrator all the time, and he doesn't see himself as a perpetrator. And to be honest, I don't necessarily see him as a perpetrator, but he is adopting this role all the time of like attacking, you know, he says that trans people, he says mean things about trans people and stuff like that. Or he's, you know, he says things about how trans people aren't whatever they say they are. It doesn't really matter. And then he was
people who make a living out of making snarky comments and provoking people, and they might do it on Twitter, or they might actually get a microphone and a camera crew and go into public and like try to bait people into saying stupid thing. And they're like, hey, watch my YouTube. I made this Trump supporter, or even on the opposite, I made this Biden supporter freak out, right? And like, what does that accomplish? What did you add to the world? I mean, that I don't understand. You know, when Einstein was 25, he wrote E equals MC squared. This 25-year-old YouTuber is just picking on people that they just met. I mean, do something with your life.
Yeah, and there is a huge separation here between media. Like I would, you know, if I listen to Sam Harris, or, you know, when I used to listen to Jordan Peterson, it was like really useful for me. It was things that changed the way I saw the world and helped me. And then when I see this, it's like, this is actually just reinforcing my beliefs that are already there. This is reinforcing whatever beliefs I had, that the other side is stupid, and they make, you know, they make impulsive dumb decisions. They don't think things out. And it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of just candy, but it's like rage. It's like it just makes me more angry for some reason, and I'm addicted to it. But it seems like we're kind of trapped in this victim triangle where the left seems to want to be, well, we talk about it, right? We talk about the victim Olympics. The left always wants to be victims, but we actually don't talk about our own side. The right is perpetrators. They like to talk about how stupid the left is and how they're weak and how they're snowflakes and call them all these names. But we're just stuck in this same stupid victim triangle, because I don't know. I mean, I don't know who the saviors are. Maybe the saviors are the centrists, who are kind of trying to separate people and bring them together and stop them from fighting. But actually, we can just step out of this triangle at any time. We don't have to keep playing these roles constantly.
I mean, that's kind of like what I tried to do. So like, if I can go back on like somewhat of my bad habits, where that certainly did not help me when I ran into problems in the Democratic Party, is, you know, I might make a snarky Facebook status that other people in the Democratic Party could see, and I know they would see, right? And so I stopped doing that, and my commitment to that ultimately led to me just deleting my Facebook entirely. And it's like, why be a perpetrator for no reason? I didn't necessarily think of it in those explicit terms, but that was the general train of thought. But also it's like, so I'm going to stop being a bad guy, but the guy that stepped up and organized the first chapter of the Progressive Caucus and did it in 6 weeks, and then nobody else really seemed particularly able to do it that well at all. And then even after they got it chartered, most of them just fizzled out and stopped meeting. So I was the only one who not only able to create one, but then keep it running. That took a lot of work on my part, and a lot of my own time, and really like just career and income opportunities that were lost. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to save people who are just going to constantly need me to fix their problems and, be a victim. And it's like when, they want to mutiny and be like, no, I want the organization to be run this way, but I don't want to have to be the one to plan and schedule the meetings. I don't want to have to be the one to, meet with the other leadership in the party. And I don't want to have to be the one that has to be blamed whenever there's a problem because my name's at the head of the organization, right? I said, I'm going to stop helping these folks, right? And I'm going to wait until they need me more than I need them. And again, this is what happened with Cincinnatus. If he ever dreamed of being dictator, he chose the right strategy for it, which is wait until the Roman people needed him more than he needed them. And he got the commission. And it's very easy to step out. Life became much more simpler and happier for me. And it's amazing, just like in the last 2 years, how things have taken off positively for me just by stepping out of that and keeping things simple, and not being subject to the negative incentives that constantly being in that triangle entails.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a Stoic, aren't you? I mean, I don't know if you are a Stoic, but you practice Stoicism, don't you?
Yeah, so I subscribe to Stoic philosophy, and to the extent that makes anybody a Stoic, it is always strange to go out and say, hey, I'm a Stoic, like I'm a Christian,
Yeah.
I'm an atheist kind of thing. It's not a term that comes naturally. I kind of feel like rather than say Stoic things like I'm a Stoic, it's much better to do Stoic things, and if people want to conclude I'm a Stoic from there, that's the better way to do it. But yes, I find Stoic philosophy has sort of been, and I wish I had found it sooner, but certainly been helpful with a lot of the self-improvement I've made and discussed up to this point. Pretty central to how I look at things. And it filled kind of like the void that is left when you stop having religious beliefs. Even if you have a fairly secular religious upbringing like I did, there's definitely a void that comes from that. And this has often been discussed in IDW as the meaning crisis. Sam Harris's meditation app is an attempt to respond to that. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is kind of an answer for that.
Peterson also pro-Christian or pro.
He has the whole like Christian atheism thing, and a lot of Peterson fans who are just a Christian apologists have just latched onto that because they're like, oh, well, it's okay for me to teach children unscientific things because it gives them a meaning framework.
You're triggered. You're triggered by Christians. Okay.
Obviously I followed the new atheist movement for a reason. And so
trigger warning, snowflakes.
Yeah. No, and so what caused me to stop believing in God is there was just no reason to do it. And then when you sort of extrapolate from there, value systems that are based on something that are unsubstantiated are very difficult to justify. And if they cause people misery and suffering in real time, it's hard to just be quietly patient about it.
I think there's a lot more to religion than I think new atheists kind of only tell you the bad parts about religion and not the good parts. Like for instance,
so they pulled the religion out, but they didn't replace it with anything. So like when Indiana Jones switches the idol with that bag of sand, the atheists have a bag of sand.
It's not that easy to replace it with things because, okay, here's the thing. Here's the problem with that. Religion has been around for thousands of years. In fact, every single society in the world, besides, you could argue, this present society, had a religion. And this present society just has like feminism and then all lives matter and whatever. That's their new religion, which is fucking stupid. It's a dumb religion. But like, you can't just replace you can't just take Sam Harris's meditation app and replace it with religion because most people won't do it. And most people, it's like politics, all right? Most people don't have the time to look into everything that Congress and the Senate does and what the president's role are and stuff like that. Some people do. That's great for them. But most people just need something kind of in the background that tells them what to do, that gives them a structure. And then maybe they are intelligent enough and interested enough to like leave that structure and go figure out their own stuff. But I don't know if you can just, here's an example, right? My partner, Elliot, is Jewish. And his parents went away for a little while. And so we do every Friday night, we do Shabbat dinner. And so with Shabbat dinner, it's very specific things that you do. You break bread, you drink wine, you say prayer. And we went to his sister's house and we made sushi. And then we didn't do the rituals for Shabbat dinner. And then he said to me after that, oh, it was kind of a modern Shabbat dinner. We didn't do all the rituals. And I was like, yeah, sure. But like, if we're just, let's just say, let's extrapolate to like 10 years in the future, right? Like pretend his parents aren't around and we just decide to go to his sister's house every dinner and it's not religious. Well, what happens when her kids have kids? Like, they're probably not going to do this ritual. They're probably not just going to go see their family every dinner time, and it's going to slowly fade away. But the fact that it's a religious element that God tells you to do it ends up meaning that you are obligated to go and see your family or your friends or whatever, just hang out with your community every Friday night, which ends up being so enriching for you. Like, people need to, it's fantastic to see your community every week and spend a lot of time with them. So I don't know, really, it's hard to replace religion. It's not that simple.
Right. And then this is why I find Stoic philosophy useful, because at least it gave some kind of new framework for me that didn't require me to come up with excuses to justify religious dogma. You know, the meaning crisis being what it is, it doesn't make the problems of religion that triggered new atheism go away. Like, those still are around. So it's like the rigid tyranny that religion has is still a problem there. And, you know, you have to be able to justify that if you're going to have a religious system. And this weird fourth dimensional Christian atheist argument by Jordan Peterson for a non-Christian atheist, but like an evangelical to use, I don't think is something I can get behind. But there are potentially other just more secular meaning systems that can be explored. I think Stoicism provides an opportunity for that. I think Sam Harris is trying to do a similar thing with his meditation app, and there are potentially other ways it can be done. But, you know, kind of like if you want like an example of a framework and a meaning system that can go wrong, but we're not talking about a religion. It's just imagine what it would feel like to be the most hardworking and most productive person in the commune, right? Just think how much life is going to suck for you, how much that's just going to feel like a needlessly cruel existence. Because not only will you be doing more work, but people will resent you for it. People will assume you're more successful because you're like cheating, or you're the bourgeoisie, and they'll turn on you. And then the whole commune ends up being worse for it. And then just, you know, substitute that for, imagine being the gay kid, you know, in the evangelical Christian congregation, right? There's going to be a lot of just difficulty and cruelty you face for that, for no reason other than people feel like they have to do it. And so it's reasons like that I don't think going back 20 years to religiosity is the answer. You know, the meaning crisis, you know, being recognized for what it is. I think it is a lazy answer to say, oh, we have to go back to religion just because some people didn't really find a reply. Well, some people do argue that. That's what I'm saying. Some people do argue that.
I think we should adopt new religion. I think we should see we should allow Christianity, for instance. I'm, you know, into Judaism. I'll probably convert at some point soon, but like, I'll take Christianity because Christianity is kind of the main thing in the West, right? I think we should probably take Christianity, but right now, okay, the huge problem right now is like, you have a 14-year-old who says, how do I know God is real? And then people are asking this, they're talking to this 14-year-old from this, like, how do you know God is real perspective? When actually what the 14-year-old is actually what's actually happening is they need to see it from a 3D perspective. So like, there's this 2D perspective in the religion of like, you live by the rules, you know, you do everything you're supposed to do because God told you to do it. And then there's another layer here of like, why do we do these things? Maybe these things are important. For instance, like not having sex before marriage. That's actually probably a great thing to do because then you don't have kids out of wedlock, and single parent families are known to do far worse than, you know, dual parent households and stuff like that. So like, just because in the past we had this rule of like, God told you to do it, but now maybe we can like, I think probably people can adopt Christianity in a way that allows them to also see it from like a 3D point of view where they can understand why everything is so important. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
well, I mean, I think it's worth noting that, yeah, even a rigid system provides an order and stability that is superior in many ways to the state of nature, where it's just the wilderness and chaos and no law and order. It's certainly preferable to that, but you know, that's not really at stake for us anymore. We're not at risk of going back to that at the current stage of human development. And so then that's when you have to ask, well, why do we have all these like really old, rigid rules? And that's, you know, the
we have gone back to single parent families.
Yeah,
So,
well, with single parent families, it's true. And so I think people,
you can brush that off lightly, but that's actually like single people coming from single parent families are almost always far more likely to have, I mean, just statistically, they're far more likely to go to jail.
yeah, and so then that needs to be the argument. It shouldn't be, oh, wait until marriage to have sex because then you'll be a dirty whore and you'll burn in hell.
Yeah, okay, we don't need that. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't happen, right? But you know, you might have a child who has an estranged father, and then they have depressions issues, and then they swallow a bunch of pills and they die when they're 17, and then you just that was the consequence of a 5-minute mistake. You know, that's a real thing that happens to folks. I'm sure more than once, and other similar tragedies. I mean, me personally, it's like you know, if I were actively on the dating scene, I certainly wouldn't want to date the single woman who happens to have a child, because it's like, I don't want to have to worry about his father one day knocking at my door at 2 a.m. Fuck that. Yeah. I mean, life is difficult and chaotic enough, right? And so I mean, that's just another reason there why it's just better to wait to have sex with people that you at least trust enough that if you have an accidental pregnancy that you're not going to terminate. Yeah. That everything's fine. And if you don't trust a person enough to do that, don't have sex with them.
Okay, the thing is though, that's all well and good for people who are intelligent and introspective enough to make those decisions. And also, you know, even intelligent people make mistakes or whatever, but like, that's not most of the population. Most of the population needs someone, I think, unfortunately, like, where's the replacement? You said like we shouldn't call people dirty whores, and I don't want that. I don't want people to feel ashamed of expressing their own needs or whatever, but like, where's the replacement for that? Because if you tell the average person, you know, who works at a laundromat, like, or the average high schooler, don't have sex because no reason, or, you know, don't have sex until you're in love because you don't, because like it's not a good idea to have a baby out of wedlock, they don't like comprehend that very well. When you used to tell people you're a dirty whore and you're going to hell, it worked. Like, I mean, it didn't work all the time. People had sex before marriage all the time. They just didn't tell everyone. But like,
one thing that's interesting is that like millennials and to a greater extent Generation Z, they have sex at a much lower rate than they're much less sexually active.
Just to watch porn, I guess.
Yeah.
And they have low testosterone. Everyone has low testosterone nowadays.
Yeah, but it's like males and females are having less sex.
Women who have high estrogen are actually end up being more masculine. And that's probably because I think there's probably a huge reason here. Like all the soy we eat, soy is in everything. And like the plastics that we eat, it's probably a huge contributing factor to how fucked up people are. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so it is tough because you can't tell people you're a whore, you're going to hell, if only because that's essentially not true. We can't really know if it's not true, but like we can't substantiate it. But like at the same time, there has to be some kind of deterrence from stupidly creating a whole other person that you can't take care of in a chaotic, unstable family environment. So there definitely should be some kind of deterrence from that. And like, what is the good answer to that if you're not going to tell them to go to hell? And And I don't think we've quite figured that out. Now, maybe part of the answer is me saying, oh, I won't date somebody who is a single mom because, again, I don't want to worry about their father knocking on my door at 2 a.m. One exception maybe being like if she's a single mom because the father died due to unusual circumstances, but that's not most single mothers. So if more men are clear, like, oh yeah, I won't date a single mom, that's a deterrence because
well, I mean,
it's one thing if there's some kind of healthy stigma to it to discourage it, there's that. I mean, we could be somewhat harsher about it and say, we could be more likely to have the state take children away from parents who clearly can't take care of them. That's much more likely to occur in single parent households. Of course, that's going to be very controversial, even for people who don't have children out of wedlock.
And it's not actually better for the kids, even in really shitty situations. Like, I mean, in the worst of the worst, it's better, but most of the time it's better to have the kids with the parents.
Yeah. And so what's the solution there? Do we cut off welfare for
no, yeah, I mean, that's awful.
Like, there's already a malnourishment problem. So maybe sometimes the answer is life sucks.
I'm just saying that religion has left a hole in this situation that we haven't really filled yet. And we can say religion's bad and all that, but like it actually was a pretty neat solution that they came up with 5,000 years ago when they believed that the thunder was God angry at them or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think religion has quite a few things like that we don't have.
Having said that, on the whole, it's not just sexual activity that's on the decline in our increasingly secular and irreligious society, but violent crime rates are much lower. So even with increases in single motherhood and men growing up without fathers, and those men being more likely to engage in violent crime because they don't have a good male role model, the overall trend for society is still one in which there's a decline in violent crime.
Just because there's a decline in violent crime doesn't mean like those boys are still growing up, and also the girls are just becoming strippers, and the guys are being useless video gamers, I assume. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are excellent people who do wonderful things.
I'm just saying it would be really concerning if secularism and irreligiosity had like a wholesale increase in violent crime associated with it, on top of just the increased likelihood of
testosterone has dropped. Testosterone has dropped over 50% since the 70s as well. I mean, I think that maybe it's the lack of exercise or whatever, but I don't think that can also be attributed just to religiousness.
So the solution is just to feed people more cornstarch.
Yeah, cornstarch, soy, plastics. Do you know much about plastics? There's these things called phthalates in plastics. PTH, weird name. PTHLAT, whatever. Yes. Anyway, so plastics, especially heated up plastics, leach into your system, and they create like, I don't know if this is the entire chain. Maybe I'm kind of wrong here, but they create like pseudoestrogens. They make you fat, and like pregnant uterus owners eating plastics like leaches into their babies. It disrupts their growth, and especially like prepubescent kids and stuff. And so
I've often worried about what the effect of microplastics in our bodies could be. I've been more likely to try and buy things like that come in like a metal or glass container when I can, but
I have as well. Yeah,
plastic is used for so many things. It's just you can't really avoid it.
Yeah, I am facing this problem as well, and I think the best solution that I've come across so far is just wholesale getting rid of heated plastics. And even like sometimes I'll get takeout food every so often, and like it has heated plastic and whatever, but like for the most part you can avoid heated plastic pretty easily, which is the really bad one. But even then I don't know how detrimental it is to adults. It's probably not great, but like especially pregnant women and like little kids is probably really important to avoid that stuff. Mm-hmm. It affects their development a lot. And penises are getting smaller. I learned that too. Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't know.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one self-aggrandizing dick joke I'll probably ever make.
Fantastic. We have it recorded here today.
Oh, no. All right, I can finally be canceled.
Yeah. Oh, I know. We'll get you canceled. We'll say some more stuff. What's your opinion on Candace Owens? No, I'm just kidding. Let's go into that. Stoicism, though, I wanted to kind of pick your brain about stoicism because I have this one issue with it.
Okay.
Where maybe we'll kind of finish off fairly soon. But I have this one issue with stoicism where I feel like you have to suppress your emotions with stoicism, and I prefer a lifestyle where I accept my emotions. I don't necessarily have to act on all of them all the time, but like I like to accept my emotions and process them and listen to them deeply because we've been evolving for 5 billion years and they probably have something useful to tell me. But it seems like stoicism is all like logic and stuff. What do you think about that?
I think that's a common complaint people have about stoicism. Like that essential just statement you just made is usually what people would say when they have a problem with stoicism. I think that kind of misses the point of it a lot because really stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about living in accord with nature, nature with a capital N. And this can mean literal, like in a sense, literal nature, like the outdoors and wild animals and flowers and trees. But it can also mean, nature, just applying it to everything. Like, what is the nature of the broader universe? What is the nature of abstract things like societies? And what is your own personal nature? And so Stoicism teaches that, if you are unhappy with something, and we're talking about like unhappiness, like not like you stubbed your toe and it hurt, but like, the misery of existence, right? If you experience that, I had a bad day today. A lot of that has to come, that comes from unrealistic expectations. Now you take that to an extreme example, right? Where you just had perfect foresight of everything. You'd be able to avoid anything that would cause you a problem. So you know exactly when the car wreck is going to happen and know how soon or late you needed to pull out of your house so that you wouldn't get caught up in it, for example. And just imagine going through your whole day like that. So to some extent, just because you can't foresee every problem, you have unrealistic expectations, and the pain and misery you encounter is a result of that. So then you think, well, what is the most I can minimize personal tragedy by having realistic expectations, as much as realistic as my finite brain can gather information and understand it and develop good rules of thumb. And so once you get that process started, the kind of calm demeanor that is associated with Stoic philosophers becomes easier to practice. So you think, what is my nature? Like, what are things that set me off, for example? Remove yourself from those situations. You can adopt a rule like that. And then you'll seem like a very calm and together person. And maybe you weren't necessarily like that. Like, so I'm known for having the ability to have a fiery temper, for example. My relatives know about this. Some people who've known me farther back can recall this about me, and they often found it quite humorous, but it is also that same fiery temper that would cause me to post a snarky Facebook status that did not serve me well. And so part of like deleting Facebook not only removed the feed of things that would upset me, but it also stopped me from saying things that would later be used against me. And so as a consequence, there's much less negativity in my life. And as a resting state, I'm a much less unhappy person. When I encounter other tragedies, I can take them much more in stride because I understood the nature of myself. I understood the nature of my problem. I'm on something like Facebook. It calls itself a friends list, but that is not the nature of Facebook. It is an enemies list. So once I understood that and I adjust my expectations, that was one thing that just reduced a lot of stress from my life. And there are other things I've eliminated. When I go back to saying I've made things a lot simpler, there are problems I don't have because I went back and I looked at things like, where were my expectations unrealistic? Why did this go poorly for me? What could I have done better? And that's when I began to realize the 1% of me that was at fault, even if 99% of the fault belonged to everyone else, whether it's the Republicans, the corporatist Democrats, the progressive Democrats, the 1% I could have done better, could that have actually been decisive? And so apply that to everything, not just politics. And so you'll avoid things that that stops stressing you out. And then by being stressed less often, when you encounter inevitable stressors, you're much more psychologically able to deal with them because you're just not in a constant state of like anger and misery and down in the dumps. And it can take a while of like just consistently doing this before you will not become that improved person overnight. And, if we're talking about like something that is a meaningful solution to the meaning crisis, it's not going to be an instant fix. It's something that steadily compounds like that, like a good investment. And that's where I think people think like they misunderstand stoicism. Like you instantly go into repressing your emotions. And you don't actually have to repress your emotions, but you'll have much more self-awareness of like, what is the nature of myself? Why am I unhappy about these things? And sometimes your anger can just disappear when you have this meta self-awareness about why you're reacting the way you are. And so it doesn't require you to be like, you're sitting there and you want to say something, you're like fighting the like, cussing that guy out. That's not what a Stoic does. You are in fact not tempted to lash out like that because you've adopted simple strategies that make it easier to do that. And so, and I used to be somebody who would, I would raise my voice and yell when I got angry and stuff, but I got to a point where I felt tempted not to do that. But then I also realized yelling never has served me. I have never yelled at anyone and gotten what I wanted from it. And so I've avoided people and cut people out of my life even that I know that talking with them is going to lead to yelling. And future relationships that I've developed with folks, I make a point never to yell at them. So the one girlfriend I've had, even though we had some fights, I never yelled at her one time, even when I thought she was completely being ass backwards about something, which confused the fuck out of her because all her ex-boyfriends had yelled at her. And it meant that the conversation did not go in this bitter, toxic way that she usually remembered it with her exes. I would actually sit patiently and just wait for her to say what she wanted to say, which sometimes could take 5 whole minutes before she said anything because she was not very articulate, but also I just think the shock of me like patiently waiting there and letting her say something like gave her the time to think more clearly about it. And when you actually then exercise that kind of self-restraint and you see the reward of it, it doesn't really feel like the next time you do it, doesn't really feel like you have to fight anything. Or like, oh wait, this is what works. I do want to not like explode into a temper tantrum because I know that doesn't work. I know, in fact, keeping my cool is going to work out so much better for me, or it's significantly more likely to work better for me than dominating him with a shouting match would be.
Yeah.
I don't think people, connect those dots when they just sort of, they know about the general idea of the Stoic, the guy who's calm, who doesn't react, who keeps his emotions in check. And it's not like you just flip a switch like, okay, I'm going to stop feeling things now. It's you develop these steps.
Do you feel tempted to yell at people? Ever? Do you ever feel tempted to yell at people?
Not anymore. If I ever do raise my voice, it's not when I'm yelling at people, but maybe like I'm a bit excited and I'm sharing something, or maybe there's a loud bus or something, but it's not like I'm not going to yell at someone because I'm angry at them or because I'm trying to tell them what to do or like, socially dominate them. That is not something that I seek to do anymore.
That's good. It's fascinating. There's, I find that although all these different philosophies have different names, a lot of them end up converging on the same points. There's this guy, Kim Bada, who has this shadow course. You have to pay for it, but it's really good actually. And it's, shadow is this idea of like, we repress things in ourselves and we project them onto others. And so there's this idea of like, when you get upset at other people, you're actually upset in like maybe something they have that you want or something that you dislike in yourself, or maybe like something that your mom said to you years ago and like put onto you and now you have to like contend with it or whatever. There's all these different parts. But the first stage of like, I guess once you start actually understanding shadow, like what you said with where you're yelling at people, like, so at first you're kind of unaware, and then you realize that you're yelling at people and you're getting upset at people. And then the third thing that you do is you remove yourself from the situation. And then after that, you start to like notice, oh, hey, I want to yell at this person. Where is this coming from? And then like, you kind of understand, you begin to understand where your anger is coming from. So like, if I'm really angry, it's because I feel disrespected, and I feel disrespected because I am trying to make a name for myself in this company because I did so badly in school and I want to prove myself, or whatever it is, you know, and like you keep going down.
And that was a similar thing I encountered with some of my frustrations when I would lash out, when I would be unkind to people, was I was in a position in my mid-20s where I felt like I had no control in my life. And part of just what I wanted was have some actual autonomy of my existence. And I was just lashing out, looking for a chance to do so. And, you know, it caused me to be involved in negative behaviors. When I stopped doing that, then I finally got some autonomy over my life. You know, so that's how that works. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, anyone who watches this, they'll understand the basic logic of what I said about the Stoic approach to things. But it will really truly make sense the first time you actually experience one of those moments that I described in your head, when you've actually just lived in and done it for yourself. Because like I said, it's not going to be an instantaneous thing where suddenly everything you can just take it easily. It took a few years of me untangling the mess inside myself to get to be more like I am now. And I suspect it would be true for just about anybody else. And it may even be longer for some folks because maybe their body produces higher levels of adrenaline when they get excited. So they have a lot more, you know, if we're talking about living in accord with nature, that's part of nature as well. It's like, what about your body makes you behave differently? And so, you know, if one person conquers their emotional outbursts in a year, adopting these kinds of habits, and the other person does it in 5 years, well, you know, maybe the person who did it in 1 year was already a pretty mellow dude. So that, you know, the guy who took 5 years shouldn't look at himself as a failure. You know, the nature of his problems, he had a bigger hill to climb, and he should be proud of himself if he eventually climbs it.
Yeah, I think lack of trauma or dealing with our trauma is something that is like a superpower. I've been thinking like, okay, well, in America, we have this wonderful country where if you are intelligent and hardworking, you can get anywhere. But I actually don't. I used to think that, and now I think intelligent, hardworking, and also have dealt with your trauma, because a lot of people, and maybe the trauma gets in the way of being hardworking or whatever, but like, or intelligent, you know, maybe it stops you from being curious or whatever. But I think if you can deal with your trauma, it unlocks so much more of your potential.
Yeah, because I mean, most people who knew me, even if they didn't like me in the Democratic Party, would probably think I was intelligent and hardworking, but I still had friction with them. And because I had my own internal traumas that I hadn't resolved at that point. And after I began to do that, things got better. And I think it kind of goes, so resolving your trauma is kind of hand in hand with another thing, which is, I think, luck. But then you also hear this phrase, you know, successful people make their own luck. And so if Elon Musk sits next to you in an airport, if you're somebody who has not worked out your internal trauma, who is intelligent and hardworking, but you haven't conquered your internal trauma, that's just an interesting conversation. If you're somebody who has conquered your internal trauma, you have the ability to see opportunities now. You're no longer a victim, right? And so, whereas the person who is still a gloomer, sitting next to Elon Musk, oh, this will be a cool story to tell my friends. The person who has conquered their internal trauma and can seize on positive opportunities, suddenly they're next to Elon Musk, right? This could be the moment that their life completely turns around and improves. But that won't happen if they're like, oh, I'm a victim. They'll think, oh, should I tell Elon Musk about this thing? No, he'll just think I'm an idiot, you know. I mean, and that's often the difference between whether somebody continues to live a life and then die a life of mediocrity versus they go on to be an enormous success. And it very well could be the same person if they just had maybe, you know, different balance in chemicals in their brain, regulating their happiness and their sadness. But otherwise, everything else is the same. That could be the difference between what they do at that moment.
You know, yeah, I love that. That was really good. And we say different balances in chemicals, and I was thinking about this the other day. Like, you know, we sometimes say depression is a chemical imbalance, and it's as if to say it's not my fault. It's somehow externalizing the internal, right? It's like, but actually every single thing in your brain that ever happens, every thought you have is a different balance of chemicals. And just because depression is an imbalance of chemicals doesn't mean you can't rebalance it. And whether it be through medication, but like, I don't know, I'm not going to tell you whether or not to take medication, but like I have dealt with my own issues by exercising a lot. Specifically, exercising helps. Diet helps, but it's really exercise for me. And like, you know, just shaping the way you think, like journaling, stuff like that. So just because, yeah, it's, you can control your own chemical balance is what I'm saying.
And that's something that I found. It's my outlook on life certainly improved after I started adopting these practices. And I don't know if I was depressed in my early and mid 20s, but probably a good chance that I was. And when I think about just the way living felt then, or sometimes I would be so unhappy, I felt like I was actually physically ill from it. And the only thing that changed was like, you know, what was my attitude going to be on every new day? I think you're right that like, I mean, for some people, it might actually be some weird chemical imbalance, like something just fires wrong in their body and now they're fled with sadness hormones. But a lot of folks could actively, you know, crank their own positive juices if they just tried harder, if they adopted different habits, if they dieted differently, if they exercised, if they did things that would provoke some kind of positive stimulation and then they're not doing, go out and get some sunshine. I mean, I guess it could differ for every person, but people have a lot more ability to improve themselves than they think. You know, when I look at folks who are just continually depressed, it's like, it's kind of sad because they're a lot closer to getting out of it than they realize many times. But there's that wall there and you just can't speak to them. Somehow they're just gonna have to realize it for themselves.
Yeah. I have a friend, and when he gets kind of down, we just go for walks. Like if I'm at his house, I'll be like, hey, you want to go for a walk? And then he generally says yes, and then we go. And it's like, I don't know, I don't need to, I'm at this point where I'm trying to be conscious not to like preach too much or tell them what to do or whatever, but it's like, yeah, if we just go for a walk or like, you know, if there are weights around, maybe we lift some weights.
If you do, they'll be like, there's nothing wrong with me. Why don't you leave me alone? You know, and
yeah, some people are like that. Yeah,
it's the fundamental same reason why I had mutinies in the progressive caucuses. People don't want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
And people who are depressed in particular want to feel like they have some kind of control. And if you're telling them, hey, be happy, fuck you, I'll be as unhappy as I want, you know? And that sounds crazy, but that's how people are.
Yeah, it's true. Depression is comfortable as well. Depression is really comfortable. It's you get used to all the darkness and the gloom, and it's just so nice. And
I don't want to get out of bed. You know?
Yeah, bed is comfortable. Yeah, it's hard to get out of something you know so well and you adjust to. Like it actually takes energy.
Everything seems scary. Like your bedroom is like your safety cave, and this world, you just know how miserable the world is, and you're like, oh, why do I want to go out in there? But like, also everything that you could ever enjoy in life is outside your bedroom. So you got to go out there to get it.
Depression is like a withdrawal a lot of times. So it's like, well, maybe going towards something isn't, I don't know. I think it's nice to start small. Like if you don't exercise regularly, try to like go outside for literally 5 minutes. Like don't make it too much, and don't get upset at yourself for only doing 5 minutes. You know, don't try to trick yourself. Just like, you know, maybe go longer if you want to, but if you go outside for like, and you know, if you go outside and exercise at all, if you go around the block once, then that's enough, and like be satisfied with it, and try to get sunshine between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. It's a great time to get sunshine, that vitamin D. And like after 6 weeks of sunshine's really important, and I think it takes 6 weeks for it to really start to like change you, and so you kind of have to do it for a longer period of time. Yeah, I've been feeling really good lately, and I think it might be the sun. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that one thing I didn't do a whole lot. I've always tried to kind of like have some level of physical activity, but I've not always been as consistent about it. But one thing I picked up from my ex-girlfriend is we would go on walks by the trails near our local library. And I continued doing that after that because I actually enjoyed the walks. I got to a point where now I feel restless and like, oh, I have to walk now. If I don't walk now, then I will be unhappy. But I haven't been doing that lately since winter hit, but it definitely made me feel a lot better, and I'd like just be done with the walk and I feel much better. And I found like, there was like ways I could isolate myself from distractions, like even going off Facebook. If you have your laptop near you, there's always things popping up on it that can distract you. And I can just sort of maybe focus on like one thing while I spend like 40 minutes going on a walk. And kind of just also remember what it was like before not to have like, the internet right next to you all the time. Back in the old days when you just dealt with whatever was, around you. Not that opportunities like this aren't good, but we get a little too caught up in it, even if we remove ourselves from the very toxic platforms.
I think we're afraid of boredom. I think that's a huge one. We're so scared of boredom. Like, and I am too. I notice it. Like when I go on walks, oftentimes I'll bring my phone or whatever with me, play some music. But it's actually really nice, and it feels very natural to just turn off and like do things without having input all the time. I was working on a farm for a little while, and I noticed I just did like a day or two of farm work, and like I noticed that I wasn't bored the entire time. And afterwards I noticed, oh, like I didn't have my phone on me and I was just doing this work, and it was perfectly fine. Like I felt great. And yeah, our brains kind of naturally adjust to not having any input but for some reason boredom is still so scary. It doesn't, and I think actually boredom is like a trigger. Boredom I don't think lasts very long, but boredom triggers you into doing something like fun, but that trigger can actually just be thoughts. So you can trigger yourself into having fun thoughts and or having new interesting thoughts. And if you're always taking an input to avoid that boredom trigger, then you're not coming up with new thoughts. Or maybe not as often.
I'm guessing boredom is probably some sort of like a way to keep our ancestors from being too lazy. When if you were lazy, you would suddenly be out of food and die. And so, we're not at the immediate like threat of like constantly worrying about whether or not we'll starve, but we still have these boredom impulses that I think were bred into us. And sometimes, like, if you ever see folks talk about like feeling existential dread when they're at home or something for no reason, I think it's because they're bored, and it's basically their body signaling to them, you have to do something with your time, not waste your time. And they don't know what to do with it. And so then phones are like a way to just distract themselves from that. But then, later on, they'll think, if they don't have their phone nearby, they might go, oh, I spent all my time on my phone. What am I doing with my life? Now I have existential dread.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught in thought loops. That's one of those ones you just need to step away from if you can. Like, don't just keep chasing it. Just like step out of it. Watch it, It's nice to watch your thoughts. Do you do a lot of like watching your thoughts?
Washing my thoughts.
Watching, like observing.
Oh.
Do you observe your thoughts, like mindfulness or whatever?
Yeah, I think, some of that is made easier if you have the kind of stoic framework, but, sort of think like, I'm thinking this, why am I thinking this? I could have thought something else, or like, your impulse is to react to this way, but realistically, this is what it is. So like, at my job, if we have like a potential client on the phone, sometimes they might just hang up on us, and nobody generally likes to be hung up on, right? No one, like in real life, if you run into someone, you're like, hey, and they just do an about face and disappear without even acknowledging you. Like most people would just be like, oh. People get angry. Some people would, be ready to throw down. But then, and I realized, wait a minute, the alternative is that they don't hang up. They talk to me for 5 minutes and jerk me around because they don't actually intend to sign up, or they try to weasel me into promising something that I could not reasonably promise. And because this person just went ahead and hung up, I don't have to waste my time doing that. I can move on to the next opportunity to sign up a potential client. And so I sort of became like aware of myself psychologically in moments like that, for example. Like, you're thinking this is bad, but remember, actually, no, this person just saved you. In some ways they were kinder because they did not continue to waste time.
That's a good way to look at things, when it's like, if you look at how every event is in your favor, they say the mark of a good leader is the one who takes advantage of a disaster. Oh yeah, I had a moment like that
where I was going to go spend time with my sister a couple months ago, and I was going to bring a game we were going to play, and I brought like everything, but I forgot the disc, and it was like a 45-minute drive to her house, and I'm just like, oh, if there's one person if there's one person where you will see me return to my fiery temper when they fuck up, it is me. If I fuck up, I become an angry asshole again. So I do not have that sense of self-restraint toward myself. But one thing I did differently was, okay, there were some things I wanted to discuss with my sister that I can still do. I have basically a 90-minute transit there and back to go over some of these ideas that we probably weren't going to talk about when we played the game anyway. So even though this is an annoying setback, doesn't necessarily make up the gas I'm spending or whatever, at least I'm not going to waste the time now. So, I talked with her about that. Oh, I don't even remember what we were discussing, but some other plans we had. And then when I got there, we just played the game, and we still had pretty much the rest of the weekend to do it. So it didn't really interfere too much. But, when I was in that moment, I was thinking, I'm so angry at myself. I said, wait a minute, Joe, this is one of those moments where you think, this is what I have to do, but what do I get to do right now? I get to talk to her and like just use the time. And so whenever I've had problems like that, I think, okay, this sucks. This really sucks. What can I do now? What do I get to do that wasn't going to happen before? And so, so for example, like, let's say, something interfered. I was not able to do this podcast with you. What do I get to do? Well, I get to continue reading the annual report for Palantir, that company started by Peter Thiel, which I'm doing for stock research for that next becoming cancel proof lesson I'm doing on the Discord server. So I had a backup, right? And so I wouldn't have been like, oh my God, she didn't show up. I can't believe it. I'm so angry. I'm going to be angry the rest of the night and not do anything. Now that's old Joe might have been more likely to do that, but that's not how I am now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to be. And it changes the way that people interact with you too, because we teach people how to interact with us, whether we like it or not. My partner, Elliot, he was dealing with this roofer for a little while. And this guy, I shouldn't have said what trade he was, whatever. He was an idiot. He just kept fucking up. He would say that he was going to come and he wouldn't come. And like, just all sorts of stuff, super unreliable. And so we had to use him for various reasons, not our decision. But Elliot's calling him up and he's going, hey, are you going to be here today? Like, he had to hound him like a child. And this roofer's probably thinking, why are all my clients so annoying? They always badger me. And like, this guy had trained the entire world to treat him like a child. And then he's probably wondering, I assume he lacks the self-awareness to realize it, why everyone is treating him like a child. And if people treat you a certain way all the time, if people are scared of you, or if they treat you like you're a child or whatever it is, then it's probably something that you are doing to tell people how to treat you. And so,
right. So that guy, that roofer, is not living in accord with nature. Like, what is the nature of a situation wherein you consistently show up late or don't show up at all on people who are depending on you to follow through, right? They will not like you, they will not trust you, and they will probably talk down on you over time. And if you don't want that to happen, then the solution is show up on time. My twin sister is actually kind of notorious for that, for like showing up late and just not doing what she promised to do. And our older sister, has some issues where she basically like, yeah, I can't trust our sister anymore, Joe. But then she told me, but I remember there was one time I had hurt myself and I called you guys and I I needed you to come and help me out and stay with me a few days, while I was like recovering. You had all your things packed and you were there in 30 minutes after you said you'd be there. And like, it didn't take you any hesitation. And then my twin sister, she's always neurotic about people thinking less of her and not wanting to include her. And it's like, well, when you are included, this is what we get.
Yeah.
And there's a very simple solution, which is like, when you're included, make it worthwhile. Because otherwise you're more problem than you're worth if we actively plan to include you in something.
And the neurotic tendencies probably make it worse. It probably makes them more worried and more likely to
Mhm.
procrastinate and
It's just, and then she'll indulge in distractions that keep her out of the neurotic thinking, but then the distractions create the problems that cause people not to like her, that then make her, and it's just a loop.
Yep. Yeah, I do that. I do parts of that myself for sure. So it's just, it's life. We're all figuring out our own psyches, and then hopefully by the time we're old enough to have kids, we've processed enough of them so we don't pass them down. That's the goal.
Yeah. Now, thankfully, one problem I never had was like not showing up on time or something. I've always just been incredibly anxious about being late, things and not showing up. And the weird thing is then you develop a reputation for being on time. I remember when I was a Domino's pizza man, which I only did for like a month. But like 2 weeks in, one guy, his name was JP, not same initials, but different name. I don't remember what his full name was. He's like, man, look at Joe. He comes to work with his uniform on right. He comes to work on time. And the on time part, like I could maybe see the uniform thing, maybe not always being done, but like he comes to work on time. And I just like thought, how do you not come to work on time? Like he saw it as the mark of a star employee that I do that. And I was just thinking like, that's just an axiom of working.
Yeah.
You should come on time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I think I'm glad that you said the other day that your current job has made use of your work ethic and all the energy you put into things. And I think that's another thing, like find a job that makes use of your talents and if you are a hardworking, first of all, get hardworking and show up on time and have your uniform right. But once you do that, like make sure you find a place that is going to take advantage of that and not just piss away your talents. I think that's very important.
In my current job, it's a good example. It was not the same as sitting next to Elon Musk, but I got my job because I met the right person, and their immediate answer when I asked if they were hiring wasn't a hard no. And it very well could have been, but I had made a good impression in my interactions with that person, limited as they were. And now it became a job that turned my life around. Better than being a pizza man or a Starbucks barista by far. If I had been my older self, or I didn't see things as opportunities, I wouldn't have been able to do this. But also folks who just aren't dependable, who don't show up on time, are notoriously late. Nobody wants to consciously hire that guy for an important job.
I'm very grateful you are where you are right now, because a few years ago you were a lot different, and you seem.
Oh yeah, because I can actually think that like some of the things I've discussed, you met me just far enough in the past that you could probably detect a lot of my older habits and even ways of thinking, and even like to the extent that I was more on like the spectrum of being depressed about things. You probably got to see that, and then you can probably more clearly observe the difference in how I am today.
Oh yeah, it's huge. You seem healthier. Like I say like healthier, like you are physically healthier, but often, almost always, physical health means mental, like better physical health is better mental health as well. Like you seem healthier, much more calm and rational. Like it's really great to see. I'm so glad that you are the way you are. And you went from a doomer to a gloomer, or a bloomer. You went from a doomer to a bloomer. So I'm very grateful, and I can't.
The only thing I had really accomplished around the time I met you was changing my diet and like losing a bunch of weight. But I was still like struggling with money. I was still kind of like warring with the other Democrats, and just had a lot of things. Hell, I hadn't even had a girlfriend yet, and I remember even then you were like trying to give me like advice on women, and I was all like, no.
Are you open to the ladies? This is what every lady listening to this podcast wants to know.
I'm open to the ladies. I don't actively seek them out. Again, I'm using the Cincinnatus strategy. I'm going to wait for, I think it's their idea that they like me. But I'm also not shutting myself off from women.
Good. That's good. Ladies, if you want a nice guy who never yells and is great with money and very intelligent and a community leader, hit up Joe Parrish.
Oh, wow, that's one of the most generous descriptions I've ever had about me. Maybe.
It is. It's true. It's true. You are eligible now. You are an eligible bachelor now. I was through this interview. I was like, oh yeah, I can see it now. I can see how women would be like, this is a great guy. You're the sort of guy I could like. You'd be a great father, for instance. I could definitely see you like raising great kids and being an excellent husband and stuff like that. So I don't. Yeah, I hope you're not selling yourself short, because you have a lot of excellent qualities.
Well, I do think I have good qualities. I think the one thing is, and maybe this is where, well, I'll point this out. So one stereotype of Stoics is, that they restrain their emotions, and it's often usually about like feelings of anger in the moment, but also they don't usually seem to be the most jubilant people either. And I think it's because with that, you also learn to be reasonably cautious about things. So I'm also reasonably cautious about things. And I understand that even if I bring nothing but pleasantness and honesty to a relationship or a social dynamic, people aren't necessarily obligated to appreciate that and return it. In fact, they might even be offended that you looked at them. And so, I try to have the expectations minimal, but, open to be pleasantly surprised. And
there's a girl out there that can bring the jubilance to the relationship. That's what I foresee.
Maybe. And that's the thing too. I do know that if you don't suddenly become this jubilant, ecstatic person, they'll be crushed. Oh, does he hate me? No. Is that why he works? That's what happened with my one girlfriend. She kind of, because I wasn't this like, I didn't suddenly become this immensely passionate like person, like who would just take her, she's like, oh my God, he hates me. And it's, but for me, it's like, my attitude was like, we met not that long ago, and I have no idea if you want me to put my hands all over you. I mean, just tell me, basically. It's a very, very different attitude, right? Hers was the more, like, oh, he hates me. Oh my God. And I'm like, meanwhile, I'm thinking, she's awfully quiet. What's she thinking about?
Yeah, it's tough. There's, I think women, women, I think, have very different ideas of what we want. Some women are like, I want to give permission for everything, and some women are like, I want you to sweep me off my feet. And I think it's nice to. Generally, it's probably a good idea for men to try to like progress things forward. I think women, we like to have generally the man to like naturally to progress things forward a little bit. Like you can be the first one to put your hand on her knee or whatever. But then if she says no, you don't like, just don't keep forcing it. Don't keep trying, like actually respect boundaries. So that's,
I accidentally progressed things into dating her. I remember because I was like basically just trying to invite some of my coworkers. This is when I was still a barista at the store to hang out. And, I asked her, and I specifically did not ask her on a date. I'm pretty sure she observed that I was asking this of pretty much everybody else. But she was like, oh yeah. And so then we started hanging out. And then after hanging out a couple of times, I got a text at 6 a.m. from her. She's like, I want to see you again. I'm like, that's a very forward text. And while she sort of initiated in that step, I accidentally kicked things into motion, just trying to be social. And somebody actually like sent me like a list of things like that you can do to make yourself more attractive to women. And one of the things they said, which I guess I was doing thinking back, was if you just go in and you acknowledge them and you say hi and you wave, and then you can just leave it at that, but just be formally pleasant with them. Suddenly, it'll have a very disproportionately good impact in terms of your perception for that lady.
Yeah, I think that's true, because it depends on the situation, obviously, but like there's a man who's desperate, who's like trying really hard to like get your attention and talk to you, and like especially the grossest ones. I don't think you do this at all. I don't imagine in any universe that you do this, but like trying to match your interest to her interest, like pretend that you like the things that she likes. It's greasy and it comes off as desperate. And a woman wants to see that you are high status. And so if you're like clamoring for affection all the time, it doesn't come off as high status. It comes off as desperate. So like if you're just like, hey, how's it going? And you know, I love your haircut. It looks really good on you. And then just keep going, like be pleasant and nice, but not, you know, yeah. And then women immediately go for you because they see that you're high status. And if you carry yourself like someone who can get any woman, and then it helps a lot. Yeah.
Yep. And it's a similar thing. It's like, why did the Romans make Cincinnatus dictator? Because, well, he didn't seem like he was like desperately trying to, oh, please make me dictator. I promise I'll treat you right. I mean, God, that big fuck off, Cincinnatus, you creepy little jerk.
Yeah.
That would have been the reaction. But no, he's all like, you know, I'm a pretty cool dude. I'm just going to hang out on my farm. And they're like, oh my God, Cincinnatus. Did you see him? He's looking fine. No, I'd love to make him dictator.
Command my armies.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Commanding armies. That's a good episode for a podcast. I think we'll call it. I think we'll call this episode Commanding Armies. I like it. All right. I'm going to let you go, Joe. It was really great to talk to you.
Okay. Thank you for releasing me.